If we had an alternative to hotel for this particular variant of concern, we would not be here today.
Tonight, breaking news, Victoria on edge. The state now 3 days into its 7-day snap lockdown, but it could all be extended depending on how many cases we get in the next few days. We've got 2 reporters on the ground ready to bring you the latest figures, and we'll chat to one political commentator who says he points the blame squarely at Scott Morrison. It's Sunday the 30th of May. You're watching 6 News also tonight.
For some of those smaller communities, Kahuna, Kerrang, very little relevance to someone in Ballarat or Traralgon. So it's a loss for local stories.
WIN Television accesses 9 local news bulletins in yet another cut for regional communities already dealing with the loss of many print and radio services. We'll speak exclusively to a former WIN journo about the story you saw first on 6 News. And there was a theory dismissed by many as a conspiracy, but now many are asking, did COVID-19 come from a lab in Wuhan, China? Our US correspondent will have the latest on what President Biden is saying about the possibility of a lab leak.
The president believes there needs to be an independent investigation, one that's run by the international community. It's an international pandemic that has killed hundreds of thousands of people around the world. He believes the Chinese need to do more to put forward data, to be more transparent, and in the second phase of this effort, he's certainly hopeful that will be the case.
Good evening, thanks for joining us this Sunday. If you're wondering where our studio looks a little different, it's because we're not in our studio. I'm back reporting, producing and presenting from home due to the lockdown here in Victoria. And that is our top story tonight, with Victorians around halfway through their 4th COVID-19 lockdown. Authorities called for people to get tested, and that's exactly what people did, with record numbers throughout the weekend. But there's still a lot of concern about whether the lockdown could be extended to 14 days or even more if people continue to avoid the jab due to hesitancy issues. We'll be getting to that a little later. First though, let's go to Melbourne, where senior reporter Darby Travers begins our special coverage.
Victoria has today recorded 5 new locally acquired COVID-19 cases overnight, as well as 1 acquired overseas on day 3 of the state's 4th lockdown. It takes the cluster, which began out of a South Australian quarantine hotel, to a total of 40. An aged care worker at a facility in Melbourne's West is one of those cases, sending the home into a lockdown. The facility says the worker had their first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, as had a, quote, significant number of the residents. A number of new exposure sites have been listed by health authorities, including the Chadstone Shopping Centre, with those who shop there on May 26 from 11:30 to 2 p.m. asked to get a COVID-19 test and self-isolate until you get a result. The Department of Health says just over 45,000 test results were received overnight, around 10,000 shy of Saturday's record of 56,624. Authorities say Victoria has now passed over 1 million vaccines administered to the public, with more than 21,000 doses given yesterday, and the Chief Health Officer Brett Sutton has now said that the state has the capacity to administer as many as 30,000 every single day. As first reported exclusively by 6 News, Acting Premier James Merlino today announced a $250 million support package for businesses affected, but says he's beyond disappointed that the federal government hasn't offered anything. Trade Minister Dan Tehan was today asked about that on the ABC.
You can go to Centrelink, and if you're eligible, if you've lost a complete week's work, or if you're going to leave 2 weeks' work, then you might be eligible for one of these emergency health payments. So for those people who find themselves in circumstances where they've completely lost their income, then they should go to Centrelink and see where they're eligible for.
Well, I had a look at the
payments.
Government Services Australia website, and that wasn't my reading of it. Are you saying to us this morning that if you don't necessarily have COVID, you're not necessarily close contact, but if you are nonetheless affected by the lockdown, you can access one of these payments?
if you've lost your income, and obviously it depends on eligibility, and you're going to lose your income for the week, then you should go to Centrelink and see whether you might be eligible for an emergency payment.
Are you eligible if you don't have COVID? Are you announcing a new government policy position here that you can get the payment?
This is not a new government policy.
So you can't get the payment if you don't have COVID, or you're not a close contact?
Well, what I'm saying is you should, if you've lost all your income, and then you should go to Centrelink and see whether you're eligible for payments.
And what will they say?
To remember,
what will they say? If you don't have COVID or you're not a close contact?
I mean, David, it will depend on your circumstances and on your loss of income. So they...
Darby Travis reporting there, and as I mentioned just before we threw to his report there, a lot of the anger about this lockdown has been directed towards the federal government, some even labelling it Morrison's lockdown. Now, the vaccine rollout has certainly been a major issue. Australia is falling behind compared to a lot of other countries. Israel, for example, is one that has shot significantly ahead compared to our country, and a lot of hesitancy, especially coming from AstraZeneca's jab. Reporter Lincoln Holmes has the details.
Victoria is back in lockdown, and some say that the federal government is to blame.
This is a Morrison government lockdown in Victoria. In Victoria, we've already done more than our fair share to stop a third wave, so why haven't you done yours?
On Twitter, the hashtag Morrison's lockdown began trending for a number of hours, even before the official announcement, with many blaming the PM for the latest round of restrictions. Political commentator Hayden O'Connor was one of them.
Definitely has to be Scott Morrison who is to blame for this, and his government, because both the Australian Medical Association, the Public Health Association of Australia have criticised the uses of hotels.
It's not just online. Acting Premier James Merlino has also said that the lack of more quarantine options and the slow vaccine rollout may also be contributing factors.
If we had an alternative to hotel for this particular variant of concern, we would not be here today. If we had the Commonwealth's vaccine program effectively rolled out, we may well not be here today talking about these circuit breaker restrictions that we must impose to keep our community safe.
In an exclusive interview with 6 News, the Federal Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers shared Labor's proposal for what they would do with returning travellers.
Our proposal is for the federal government to build and maintain quarantine facilities. You know, a lot of people have been staying in hotels. There have been some issues with hotel quarantine. Hotels were built for tourism, not for quarantining people with a potentially deadly virus. And so I think there's a role for the federal government to step in, build and maintain some facilities. Clearly there's a role for the federal government in terms of the personal protective equipment side for people who work in these hotels and other quarantine facilities. So there are a couple of ideas that the government should be running with.
But the Victorian government hasn't escaped criticism either. Some say that the state has failed when it comes to setting up QR codes for businesses, while others suggest that contact tracing has gone wrong. But Brett Sutton strongly shut down those suggestions.
That's an absurd proposition.
Why don't we have
contact tracing in our contact tracers it's an absurd proposition that contact tracing has gone wrong. We've talked about exactly what the contact tracing team have done here. It is an extraordinary job. Contact tracing is an integral part of how to get control. It does not do magic.
The lockdown is set to end next week, provided there isn't any significant rise in cases. Lincoln Holmes, 6 News.
And just a reminder for our continuing coverage of Victoria's lockdown and the global COVID-19 pandemic, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok and LinkedIn. You can head to our website, 6newsau.com, and you can subscribe to us right here on YouTube with full notifications on for plenty more great news content. To other news tonight, the federal government is continuing to move forward with the World Trade Organization case against China's tariffs on our barley imports amid some of the worst tensions between the two nations in years. Trade Minister Dan Tehan says Beijing's decision to slap an 80% tax on imports had, quote, effectively stopped Australia's barley trade with China and wants them declared illegal. Barley is one of more than 13 sectors disrupted by the trade tensions. That includes wine, lobsters, cold beef, tourism and universities, which began when the federal government called for an investigation investigation into the origins of COVID-19. Of course, we'll be discussing that a little later. Meanwhile, the story we broke here on 6 News, and it's one that is continuing to develop even as we go to air tonight. WIN Television axing 9 local news bulletins, instead replacing them with statewide bulletins in Victoria, Queensland and parts of New South Wales. But now the regional network has been issued with a please explain notice from the federal government because it actually received taxpayer-funded funding to heap its services on last year. Chief reporter Connor Alforque has this exclusive story.
A monumental loss for local news last week.
This is WIN News.
With the WIN network announcing it will cut 9 regional news bulletins and several jobs.
It's a commitment to local news that is unmatched.
Australia's largest regional commercial television network, WIN has long been a springboard for up-and-coming journalists.
Carl Stefanovic, WIN News.
Our very own Leonardo Puglisi first broke the story an hour before the media release was published.
You're probably going to see a lot more generic stories starting the 1st of July.
WIN joins the growing number of media outlets who are fast disappearing from the regions. This time last year, News Corp shed 500 employees and 14 regional mastheads. Another 100 moved online. Declining advertising revenue and the pandemic are reportedly to blame for the loss of local bulletins. And according to some, no news is bad news for regional communities.
Some stories aren't going to get told now. It's always hard for people to get their own story told, but it's just going to be even harder now because WIN's going, to their credit, they haven't walked out of local news completely, but for some of those smaller communities, Kahuna, Kerrang, very little relevance to someone in Ballarat or Traralgon. So it's a loss for local stories, local voices.
From July 1 at WIN, regional bulletins in Queensland and Victoria will be replaced with state-based bulletins. Those bulletins will be broadcast into more areas, which is set to create some jobs. And all bulletins nationwide will air at the same time slot of 5:30 instead of 6 as WIN re-enters its relationship with 9. WIN's Chief Executive Officer Andrew Lancaster acknowledges there will be job cuts, though it's not known how many. Jeff Sargent was a reporter for WIN in Bendigo for several years, leaving just before the network underwent an affiliation swap with Channel 9 and 10. He says the regional media landscape has been shrinking for many years, but wasn't worried about cuts when he was there.
It was a lot of fun. It was hard work. There's small newsrooms. There were 3 journos, 3 camera people in Bendigo. And most of the bureaus were the same. Ballarat was a little bit bigger because it had the new studio facilities, but we would do 2 to 3 stories a day.
The ABC has pledged to invest in regional news using revenue made from deals with Facebook and Google under the News Media Bargaining Code. The cuts at WIN were despite the outlet receiving $4.5 million in funding from the federal government's public interest news gathering last year. Representatives from WIN have been hauled before the Communications Department to explain their decision, as communities and an industry reel. Connor Alforque, 6 News.
Overseas now, US authorities say 22,000 rounds of ammunition, around a dozen firearms, suspected Molotov cocktails and cans of petrol were all found in the home of the gunman who killed 9 people in San Jose earlier this week. The motive behind Sam Cassidy's rampage has not yet been determined, but authorities say he appears to have been a disgruntled employee at the Valley Transportation Authority light rail yard in San Jose, which of course is where the shooting happened. CNN reporting that Cassidy coordinated a fire at his home with the workplace attack after igniting the fire inside his home by placing ammunition inside a pot on the stove, surrounding it with accelerants, and then turning on that stove. Santa Clara County Sheriff Laurie Smith said Cassidy apparently shot himself as deputies closed in. He had at least 3 guns on him at the time. President Joe Biden has condemned a rise in anti-Semitic attacks across the US. The nation has seen an uptick in attacks on the Jewish community amid tensions following the violence in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine. In a statement, Biden said that the attacks are, quote, despicable, unconscionable, un-American, and they must stop. He also noted a number of related incidents, including a brick thrown through the window of a Jewish-owned business in Manhattan, a swastika carved into the door of a synagogue in Salt Lake City, and museums in Florida and Alaska dedicated to remembering the Holocaust vandalized with anti-Jewish messages. China has denounced efforts to investigate whether COVID-19 came from a lab in Wuhan, China. While the theory was dismissed by many as nothing more than a conspiracy last year, including by the World Health Organization, who declared it extremely unlikely, questions are now being raised over a potential cover-up by the Chinese Communist Party. US correspondent Jackson Gosnell has the details.
Well, Leo, I'm monitoring many stories here in the United States. One of the biggest so far is where the coronavirus originated from. We've had a year of COVID, a little more than a year actually, and many people since the beginning have wondered where this virus came from. There were reports that it came from a bat, others say that it came from a lab, but we really didn't know. And so last year there started to be speculation that this virus originated at a lab in China. However, the United States government, along with the World Health Organization, said that was unlikely, given that there was really no hard, direct scientific evidence. However, they are reversing course, and within the last week, the U.S. government has called for an investigation to be completed by the World Health Organization into a credible report that was published that stated that lab workers at Chinese laboratories had been hospitalized 2 months before the rest of the world knew what coronavirus was. So there is speculation that a lab manufactured or altered an original coronavirus strain before COVID-19, maybe another version of COVID, and then it got outside of there, out of control, and, all the bad things happened. But we don't know for sure, but the government is now more on board here in the U.S. with the theory that it originated in a Chinese laboratory than they once were. So again, we don't know the direct origin of the coronavirus at this point, but we do know that the government and World Health Organization are reversing course, saying that there is credibility to reports that suggest that the coronavirus was from a Wuhan lab in China. Of course, as we learn more information, we'll be sure to pass it along. I do know, quick note before we go, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki was asked about this, and she says that the White House is calling for that investigation to be done by the World Health Organization, which is expected to happen soon. Again, I'll continue to monitor the latest on this story, and as we learn more, we'll be sure to pass it along. Reporting in the U.S., I'm Jackson Gosnell. Back to you.
Senate Republicans have blocked a bipartisan bill to investigate January's Capitol siege. In total, 54 senators, including 6 Republicans, voted in favour of creating the commission, but the bill ended up failing as it needed at least 60 votes. Democrats argued that forming a commission like the one created after the 2001 9/11 terrorist attacks would prevent repeats of a similar invasion, though some opponents said it would only be one-sided. The Capitol siege left 5 people dead, including a police officer, after armed Trump supporters broke into the building in a last-ditch attempt to overturn the November election results. William Shakespeare, the second person in the UK to receive the COVID-19 vaccine, has died of a stroke aged 81. But an Argentinian newsreader has now gone viral after mixing up the man with his namesake, aka the poet, and the man dubbed the greatest writer of the English language. Of course, he died back in 1616. It's unclear whether the channel, the presenter, actually apologised or issued a correction after many on social media pointed out the now viral mix-up. Alright, now here's Ivan and Sarah with a look at what's coming up later tonight on WAMN News.
Thanks, Leo. Coming up on WAMN News, Premier Mark McGowan under pressure to sack Roger Cook as an exclusive poll shows a lack of public trust. We have exclusive reactions from Aishwarya's parents and other stakeholders.
A WA police officer is under fire for excessive force during an arrest in ACCC report.
Rallying for mums and dads, Pindan subcontractors call for better protection.
65 Roses campaign to aid in the fight against cystic fibrosis, plus Dr. Andrew Miller's comment. Join us after 6 o'clock Western Time on the WAMN News Facebook page and YouTube channel.
Alright, thanks to both Ivan and Sarah there. Now to tomorrow's forecast right across the country. Brisbane partly cloudy, top of 23, 18 and sunny in Sydney, 14 degrees in the nation's capital Canberra, 16 and heavy clouds in Melbourne, which is Pretty bad weather, but it's pretty good when you're stuck in lockdown inside. 13 in Hobart, 18 in Adelaide, 25 in Alice Springs, 18 in Perth as well. A chance of some light rain. Actually, no, there's not. Never mind, scratch that, it's sunny. And in Darwin, a warm top of 32. And finally tonight, some news about us. We now have a set of editorial policies that you can view right now for free on our website. If you just go to 6newsau.com/editorial-policies, you can read them. There are currently 4. We may add some if we get any more, but I can tell you right now what they are. They are independent and unbiased. That's 1. There's accuracy, there's corrections, and there's show all sides, but don't take a side. Of course, you can read our full explanations for those editorial policies at that link. That's again 6newsau.com/editorial-policies. And that is 6 News for this Sunday evening. You can stay up to date with the latest headlines by heading to our website, 6newsau.com, and by following us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Lit. Just search 6 News to find us. I'm Leonardo Puglisi. Thanks for your company. Good night.